Every day you log on, you're stepping into this digital world where, well, the lines are getting really blurry, aren't they? Between what you can say and what gets filtered out. The whole way we interact online, it's being subtly reshaped by internet censorship. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really going to get into this. It's a huge topic. We've gathered a whole stack of your source material articles, research papers, different analyses, taking us from, big global policy debates right down to the nuts and bolts of online interaction. Our goal here, to try and cut through all the noise and give you a clear, solid understanding of this really, really complex situation.
And it is incredibly complex. What we'll see is this constant push and pull. On one side, you've got the need, or the perceived need, to protect people from genuinely harmful stuff online. But on the other, there's this fundamental need to protect free speech, access to information. It's a tough balance.
Let's unpack this then. Internet censorship is not just one thing, is it? It hits our freedom of expression, how we get information, even how democracy works online. Now, the argument for it is often about protection, right? Stopping hate speech, illegal content, things like that. But the flip side, the paradox, is that it's so easily abused. It can be used to shut down opposition, suppress voices, and we're seeing this trend growing. More aggressive censorship, even in democratic nations, often under the banner of, say, national security or public order. This can create a sort of, well, they call it chilling effect, where people just stop talking, stop sharing because they're worried.
Exactly, and that chilling effect, it's not just theoretical. It often hits marginalized groups the hardest. Groups that really depend on the internet to get their message out, to organize. Think about the Arab Spring. What did governments in places like Egypt, Tunisia, Syria do? They went straight for internet blackouts, ramped up surveillance. Why? To stop people organizing, to stop information flowing freely. And, a huge part of the problem is the lack of transparency. How are these decisions made? What are the actual rules? Often the criteria are just so vague, harmful, illegal. What does that actually mean in practice? This leads to, well, mistakes. Overblocking, where perfectly fine stuff gets censored, and underblocking, where the really bad stuff slips through. You even saw this in Norway, right? A country we think of as having high internet freedom. But network issues led to them blocking things like human rights sites, even dating sites, just, well, inconsistent.
That Norway example is fascinating. It really shows how blunt these tools can be, doesn't it? Like they're not surgical scalpels. So, okay, let's shift gears a bit. What about the private companies? Social media giants, ISPs, their role is pretty contentious too. They obviously have terms of service, they moderate content, but is there a risk they put their business interests first, above the public good? We saw a lot of debate around this during the 2016 U.S. election, didn't we? The whole fake news, misinformation storm. Some people argued maybe more censorship than could have helped national security, but others were really worried, saying, hang on, are these platforms now deciding what's true? Becoming like arbiters of truth.
Yeah, and the tech side of this is just this constant battle, a real cat and mouse game. Users find ways around blocks, VPNs, proxies, secure browsers, you name it. But then the censors develop more sophisticated systems to detect and block those methods. China's Great Firewall is the classic example here. Super advanced blocking sites, monitoring what people do online. It's like a technological arms race, constantly escalating, no clear winner in sight, really.
This whole cat and mouse thing kind of points to something deeper about the internet itself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To really get why total control is just so hard to achieve, we actually need to look at a concept that might seem a bit unrelated at first. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Exactly. We need to talk about entropy. Now, in this context, don't think just pure chaos. Think more about the inherent unpredictability, the sheer volume of stuff online, how quickly misinformation can just explode, how hard it is to impose predictable order on such a vast open system. Censors, they want predictability, they want control. But the internet's complexity, its size, how interconnected it is, all those real-time interactions, it actually creates this disorder, this entropy, which makes total control basically impossible. It's why things like the Great Firewall are a constant effort, always reacting, always trying to catch up to the system's own tendencies.
Okay, so complexity generates this disorder, but you also mentioned complexity can mitigate entropy within a platform, like better algorithms. Is there a risk, though? Can you make things too complex? Does it reach a point where it becomes less transparent, harder for us, the users, to even understand what's going on?
That's a really important point. Academics talk about social entropy. Basically, the idea that more complex social systems tend to be, well, more disordered. Social media is a perfect example. Millions of users creating content constantly, interacting in real time, networks shifting. It's inherently complex, and that often leads to these chaotic situations, right? Information spreading like wildfire, often in ways nobody predicted. Think viral content. So strategies to manage this often focus less on just volume and more on the quality of interaction. You see platforms like Instagram or Twitter, well, X now introducing features trying to build community, trying to reduce that feeling of just being overwhelmed. They might emphasize engagement, for instance, over just raw numbers when deciding what gets shown more widely.
Right, and this is where you, the listener, actually have some power. It's about user agency, isn't it? And literacy. If you understand a bit about how these platforms work, the algorithms, the privacy settings, how they curate feeds, you can kind of get better at using them. You can make more informed choices, right? About what you post, what you comment on, what you amplify. You can actually have an influence on the conversation. Maybe even navigate around some of the censorship attempts instead of just being passively affected by it all.
Precisely. And the platform design, the algorithms, they're absolutely key. There's research showing that how complex an interface is and the sense of entropy, it really affects how people share information online. It's kind of this inverse U-shaped relationship they talk about. Up to a point, a bit more complexity might make users more creative, more thoughtful, but push it too far, make it too complex or overwhelming, and actually creativity and thinking seem to suffer. People might share less, become less engaged. And this sort of hints at why simply trying to impose top-down order, like through censorship, often doesn't work as planned. It's fighting against the system's nature. The internet's inherent messiness, its entropy and complexity makes it really resistant to being fully controlled. It reinforces why, good old-fashioned learning, thinking critically, and engaging properly with different ideas is still so crucial.
Which brings us neatly, or maybe not so neatly, to the whole regulatory side of things, trying to actually govern this space. And let's be honest, it often feels, well, convoluted, contrived, and frankly, nothing short of a hellscape to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, it really does. And this raises an important question. When we talk about regulation, what do we actually mean? Because there are different layers. You've got laws, right? Passed by governments, legally binding, setting the big principles. Then you have regulations. These are usually more detailed rules made by specific agencies designed to actually enforce the laws. Legislation is kind of the broad term for the laws made by governing bodies. And then there are policies. These are more like guidelines, often created by organizations themselves. Think of social media platforms' terms of service. They're not laws, but they definitely shape behavior. They all mesh together, but they have different weights, different scopes.
And this whole structure, it's been in flux since, the mid-90s. It feels like it's constantly being tweaked, rewritten, adapted. New laws pop up all the time trying to keep pace.
Absolutely. It's a moving target.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more then. Let's look at the real-world effects of internet censorship. Maybe we can think about it in terms of, say, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Okay, that's a useful framework. Let's start with the good, or at least the main arguments for censorship. The biggest one is usually protecting children, from harmful, inappropriate content online. So in the UK, for example, ISPs offer these optional filters for adult material. The idea is to shield kids while still letting adults access what they want. It's about finding that balance. And then there's the national security or social order argument, using censorship to block things like terrorist propaganda or hate speech that could directly incite violence. In democracies, these kinds of measures are often justified as necessary for public safety, but they're almost always controversial, subject to debate.
Right. Okay, so that's the good intention, maybe. What about the bad? Where does it go wrong?
Well, this is where you get the unintended consequences, the overreach. It happens a lot. Those UK filters we mentioned, they've ended up blocking perfectly legitimate sites. Things like LGBTQ plus health resources, art galleries, even sex education sites, stuff that might be really important, especially for young people trying to find information safely. And this leads to the whole slippery slope argument, doesn't it? Even if you start with good intentions, it can easily lead to more and more government control. It can end up stifling dissent, silencing voices from marginalized communities. Think about blocking access to online petitions or sites organizing peaceful protests. And often, there's just no transparency. You don't know why something is blocked or how to appeal it. That lack of accountability is a huge problem.
Yeah, that slippery slope feels very real. Okay, so if that's the bad, what's the ugly?
The ugly is really what you see in more authoritarian regimes, where censorship isn't just about specific content, it's about wholesale control. Think about countries like China or North Korea. There, the internet is heavily controlled. Sometimes entire sections are just shut down. Access to global platforms, Google, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, it's either completely blocked or severely restricted. China's Great Firewall, we mentioned it earlier, It's not just blocking foreign sites, it's actively monitoring and censoring what people say within China. It creates this kind of information bubble,
Mhm.
isolating people. This has a massive impact, obviously, on access to news, on political discussion, even just connecting with the outside world. And yes, people use circumvention tools, VPNs, and the like, but the state is constantly fighting back, blocking those tools too. It's that arms race again, but with really high stakes for citizens.
Okay, let's try and bring this down to a specific example. Make it a bit more concrete. You mentioned looking at South Africa.
Yes, South Africa is a really interesting current case study. They've brought in new regulations recently, the Films and Publications Regulations of 2022 and the amended Films and Publications Act, the FPA Act. These basically give the Film and Publications Board, the FTB, pretty broad powers to classify and regulate online content. This covers films, games, but also potentially other publications. Now, online distributors, and this could include social media platforms, are meant to register with the FTD, get licenses. Though, interestingly, the guidelines don't specifically lay out rules for, say, individual social media posts or YouTube uploads yet. It's a bit unclear. There are exemptions, though, for publishers under the Press Council and advertisers under the Ad Regulatory Board. The act also makes things like hate speech, revenge porn, and child abuse material explicitly illegal, and ISPs can be fined if they don't take down or report this kind of content.
So, South Africa putting these rules in place. What stands out to you there? What are the main worries or criticisms?
Well, the first thing is that definition of distributor. It seems really broad. Could it potentially pull in ordinary people just sharing things online? That's a big concern. And related to that is the lack of clarity on how it's all going to be enforced. What exactly counts as prohibited content in borderline cases? Many worry this vagueness is a threat to freedom of expression, especially maybe for activists or communities who challenge the status quo. Plus, there are real questions about whether the FPD actually has the resources, the capacity to monitor and enforce these rules effectively across the entire internet landscape in South Africa.
Has there been much pushback?
Oh, yes. There was a petition against the bill, and the Internet Service Providers Association, ISPA, they were quite critical. They argued the FPB was basically trying to grab power beyond its original mandate. It's worth noting, too, the Freedom on the Net report back in 2021 rated South Africa as partly free. They raised concerns even then about things like online content manipulation, people self-censoring, online harassment, though they did also point to the country's Data Protection Act as a positive step.
So, this South African example, it really seems to capture the messiness, doesn't it? The challenges of actually putting internet censorship into practice. Even when the stated goal, like protecting kids or stopping hate speech, might seem reasonable to many, the implementation, the definitions, the potential for overreach, it gets complicated fast.
Exactly. It shows how good intentions can easily slide into bad or even ugly outcomes when you apply these broad controls.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like the main takeaway is just how layered this whole debate is. Internet censorship. It's this constant tightrope walk, isn't it? Trying to protect people from genuine harm without crushing free expression. And maybe the key thing isn't just that it's complex, but that the lack of transparency we keep seeing, the power imbalances, that's what makes it such a slippery slope. That cat and mouse game isn't just tech stuff. It feels like a sign that trying to completely control information online might just be, well, unwinnable for the censors in the long run.
I think that's right. And technology just keeps racing ahead, doesn't it? So our ways of thinking about managing the internet have to keep evolving too. We constantly need to be asking, how do we respect individual rights and address genuine societal harms? And that chaos, that entropy of the internet you mentioned, maybe it's not just something to be fought against. Platforms can actually use that complexity smartly in their design. And you, as a user, can learn to navigate it better by understanding how it all works. Your choices online, they're not just drops in the ocean. They do contribute to the overall shape of things.
So here's something to maybe mull over. Given this constant dance between the chaos online and all these attempts to impose order, how might your conscious choices, what you decide to read, what you share, what you engage with, how might that actually influence where things go next for internet freedom? Something to think about. Catch you on the next Deep Dive.